What we're going to do is start rather simply with Deb. Why have we seen so many breaches of security over the last few years? Is it simply that we're relying more on computers, or is it something more than that?
So the question's great. I mean, why are we seeing so many breaches? I think that it's a myriad of different factors. Number one, we're putting ourselves out there in terms of our information in a digital sense in ways that we have not. Over the past 2 decades, that's grown, and our digital footprint is out there in many ways. You do online banking, you make purchases online, you have records, you interface with services providers, including government. And in doing so, you're going to give information and they're going to store information. In addition, the stakes have gone up. So those that would have that information for malicious purposes or to make money from it, obviously are going to come at anybody who doesn't take great pains to protect it. So I think that it's because money can be made in terms of the fungibility of information, and also because we are putting our information in places that we never did before.
So I was hoping that maybe Andrew could help me with this one. Because of these breaches, many of us received new bank ATM cards with special chips. I don't know if you guys did, if you're First Niagara customers, perhaps. What do you imagine went into the thinking behind those cards? What was the conversation going on in the executive suite? What happened at the very top of First Niagara, for example, to make this okay? Andrew?
That's a very interesting question, because although there's chips on the cards, most stores aren't using the chips. You still have to swipe it. So I know I personally have a new debit card where some stores I put the chip in, some stores I still swipe. So I think the first thought of it, the overall design, was to make something a little bit more secure, okay? So by putting information on the chip and adding another level of security, it's supposed to be more secure. The major issue we see with all security is compliance. We can put everything in place, but if people aren't using it, it really doesn't affect the security of the card.
So I guess the question is, how do we develop a cyber savvy community within the office? You know, I think a lot of people sort of look at the IT people as just sort of a pain in the tush. You know, oh, I have to jump over one more hurdle. But in fact, if you get these people on board, it could save your company. So Dawn, sure, as someone who works in the retail sector, what do you tell your employees?
Well, it's actually been very easy over the last couple of years, because you've all been victims of either a Target credit card fraud, or you've lost a card. You probably had 3 or 4. I had 3 of my debit cards replaced. Either it was Home Depot or Target or other locations. So when you make it real for your employees and you bring to that sense of ownership to them, you can tell them, you know, we're here to protect you and here's some guidance. So all of our awareness training is around how can it affect them personally. And then what we'll do is we'll sandwich in why we're doing this, why our policies are designed to help the company. You're going to be able to help us a lot better than, you know, just a compliance sake, check the box and then go forward. So for us, it's all about making it very real by using examples in the news, by using examples of breaches. And I'm going to be honest with you, it really didn't start to change until about 2013, when we started to see the year of the retail breach. Everyone was breached. I think 2014 was healthcare, 2015 healthcare and, you know, government. So everybody is aware of cyber threats right now, and we're taking that to our advantage.
Andrew.
I just want to add something to what Don was just saying. How many of you in the last year had cybersecurity training? Was it more than just I've read this security policy, sign this sheet, check here, and turn it back into the IT department? Good. A lot of times what we see with that training is it's read the computer security policy and sign the sheet that you've read the computer security policy. Most of the time people just click at the top, scroll to the bottom, click I accept if it's automated, and move on. A lot of times, by making it real, you can actually make people understand or help people understand that it's in their best interest to comply with this, not just, I agree.
Can I jump in there,
Sure,
too?
Jane.
Right. I'd also like to add to that that when we talk about awareness training, it is just that. As an educator, it's the very lowest level of training you can give. So if you think awareness training would ever change behaviors, it won't. It will make people literally aware. So you have to go into much more depth in order to get them up to, there's several levels that they have to be able to go through if we're going to get a cybersecurity culture within the organization that will actually change how people look at it. So those are some of the things that you really need to explore. What type of training is really going to change your culture? Because most breaches take place with individuals. The human side versus the technical side is what we have to think about so much more than we do.
Susan, can I top that off? Jane, thanks for leading into that. Basic cybersecurity awareness training needs to cover the legal and the policy aspects related to privacy and confidentiality. And specifically, it needs to focus on your business, the data assets that you collect, the importance and the value of those assets to your organization, to your fundamental ability to do business, your customers, your clientele, your citizenry, if you are a government entity. It needs to teach people how to recognize and handle sensitive information on a daily basis. I mean, your staff, your employees make decisions about how they touch, handle, and use sensitive information on a minute-to-minute, everyday basis, and it can put your organization at risk. It needs to emphasize the employee's role and responsibilities and duty, underlined and bolded, to protect information, to have the back of your organization as an employee. And last but not least, it needs to be able to encourage them and make them aware that they're not going to be penalized for making a mistake and how to report an incident properly and in a timely fashion. Some organizations treat employee training as a one-time affair. It's a cyclical process, right? You need to keep it on their radar, whether that's through the types of videos that I saw on your site at Excelsior College or through awareness messaging on a daily basis in front of them when they sign onto their PC. You need to be able to incorporate it into your cultural DNA. So that's what keeps it fresh and real and present.
The thing is that you need to get sort of buy-in from every level of your company. So Dawn, I mean, you have people who work, you know, the people who check you out, then there's the people who are in the corporate offices. Every single person has to be committed to this cybersecurity, even though we have very different levels of computer literacy. How do you do that? At the very end? Or you can,
Okay.
oh, you know what? Just ask questions, sure.
So my question is, what do you say to the skeptic? So you do the awareness, you have the policy, you do the awareness training, you have good protocols, but people who I speak to who are very knowledgeable tell me that even with all that, if someone really, if you have the right people really wanting to get into your systems, they will. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, so, you know, awareness is not everything. You still have to have a very good technical control and also policies in place to really, you know, you can't just trust everybody. You can trust them to hopefully make the right decision, but you can't trust them 100%. You have to have the adequate controls in place at the technical level or at the policy level to be able to address the people that, you know, these threats that you have that you can't control. And it's always evolving. There's always a constant threat out there, and there's a point in time where you're not going to be able to accommodate and handle any type of threat. You're going to have good recovery process, good incident response, and be able to handle and deal and do damage control afterwards. But you need to be aware of that.
I would
That's the
say that
question.
just in response, in addition to Don's comment, there's really three things. There's people, process, and technology. So if you're missing one of those pieces or you're not looking at it adequately, you're going to obviously run into some problems. So that balance
Right.
that you were talking about is really the key.
Go ahead.
When it comes to in-depth training, and this question is mainly geared towards Deborah Snyder, when it comes to training internal state employees that have access to information such as like, say people that have access to tax records and the like, when you guys conduct this training, are you guys you know, doing any sort of simulated, like this is like what this particular one example would be like social engineering or spear phishing. Are you guys getting like that deep to be like, look, this is what an attack like this might look like, and here's how to thwart it? Or is it just like a basic general 10,000-foot view of if somebody calls and asks for X, Y, Z, tell them no?
The question is about specific attacks like spear phishing and things
Two of
like
the
that.
most common attacks, yes.
Got it. So government agencies, and any organization for that matter, need to be attentive to the types of threats and attacks that might influence them. So in the financial sector, they might have to worry about credit card skimming. In government, we might have to worry about insider attacks. It varies by industry. So yes, you should certainly include realistic scenarios in your training.
Can you guys speak
And-
up louder, please?
Certainly. So training needs to be at several different levels, starting with awareness and then focusing deeply on the business aspects, how we use information every day. Also addressing the types of mandates that we are called to be attentive to. And then last but not least, exercises that cause people to think about what they would do in the event of an incident, who they would notify, what steps they would take. A lot of that is ad hoc because every incident's different. But some of that is common and can be, if you will, planned in advance, practiced, and position yourself to be more prepared. So all of those things are important, from the base level of training to establish the foundation, to the technical training to give people the skills they need to do the cyber jobs and roles that we have, to the actual positional in the business scenario training that helps you exercise response and capability.
Andrew, can you share some thoughts on how a business can adequately staff different information security roles within an organization, especially when you have a limited budget?
Well, you hit on the key word, budget, right? Information security, computer security, cybersecurity, whatever term you want to use, has always been reactionary, right? We always look at what happened and how do we recover from it. So how does a large organization prepare itself? Continuous training. It's not just a one-time deal, as we've already talked about. It's reoccurring situations. If a situation happens at the company, everybody should know about it. It should not be behind closed doors because the next person it may happen to, right? When you hire somebody, you should spend the time to train them properly because who knows, they could be the next social engineer attack. One thing I was going to say earlier was when we talk about training and we talk about budget, most companies don't know the cost of a cyber incident. There's more money lost in cyber incidents than most companies just regular budget. So when we look at healthcare and we look at tax information and stuff like that, can you put a monetary number on that? Is there a number where your company is going to be safe? Right? We all have car insurance. We all have other types of insurance. Most of the time, trying to recover from a cyber attack is a long, lengthy process. And you try and build something a little bit better than what you had because that's the reaction, right? We now know that we have a vulnerability here. Let's put this in place to stop that vulnerability. I'll call them bad people, the people performing these cyber attacks, they're way ahead of education because they're sitting there trying to do this to make money, most of them. So they have incentive. We need to turn that around, and corporates need to have the incentive to defend against it.
Do you
Right.
recommend cyber insurance? That's the new thing,
Ooh,
according to
cyber
Crane's
insurance.
Detroit.
Do I recommend it? I have not personally researched it, so it would be hard for me to recommend something I haven't researched. But I will say that depending on the information you could lose or the threats that could happen, it may be something worth looking into.
Don, we just heard Andrew talk
Yep.
about the costs of a security breach, and a lot of these come with really high liability costs. Financial services and healthcare companies are among the highest, but there's a whole bunch of other costs like your brand could suffer, for
Yep.
example. Are you ready for something like that at Price Chopper? And if so, how did you prepare for it?
One of the focuses that we started down a few years ago was really getting prepared for incident response and getting senior management all the way from the board down really engaged and involved. So we have a good committee of senior management, from public relations to risk management to our CFO, all the way up to our CEO, including IT. A breach is not just an IT problem anymore. It is all the way at the board level down, and it is really refreshing that we are able to have that type of support in our industry, in our business.
I was going to ask you about the board. So a board that has
Yep.
fiduciary responsibility needs to be hooked in.
We're fortunate that our board is very hooked in, and our senior management is really supportive of all of our efforts. Now, it does not mean we have an unlimited budget. So I also wanted to address one other point regarding that. Are you ever adequately staffed from the technical information security? I would have to say no. I could never answer that. But I can tell you that our strategy that works well is to look at the roles and responsibilities that you have within your organization and incorporate the security responsibilities as far down in the organization that you can. And then also do it where it makes sense and where it doesn't tax or stretch an existing person's job or responsibility. Make it part of their DNA. Make it part of your business process. Everywhere from a legal review to an accounting review, you really need to engage and educate your senior management on these events to get support going forward. And we've been very fortunate with that, but no, certainly not an unlimited staff or unlimited budget, but we have been able to incorporate IT security functions all within our IT department.
My guess, this is for Deborah or Dawn, I guess. My guess is that if your vendor is a slacker when it comes to security, that his problem becomes your problem. So is that true, and what kind of collateral damage could you suffer?
So third-party cyber risk, that which is associated with external business partners, relationships, and supply chain dependencies, is certainly a significant area of risk. And most organizations don't maintain an inventory of third parties that have access to or handle their sensitive information. They haven't thoroughly thought through, if you will, the processes that are required to identify and manage that risk, and specifically in the event of a breach, hold them accountable to cooperating and supporting your efforts to be responsive. So the risk implications of those relationships and contracts that involve third parties need to be thought about. And it starts really with due diligence, effective use of contract provisions that require prompt reporting of security incidents to your organization, full cooperation during response. Generally speaking, when there's an incident of that nature, the first phone call that they make is to tell you they've had a problem. Houston, you have a problem, and by the way, they've already lawyered up. So, be aware of the fact that under contract, they've got a responsibility to you. They are an agent of your organization. Those arrangements, by the way, don't diminish your organization's responsibility to ensure that your data on their soil or in their hands is handled in a safe and sound manner, assuring compliance with all the applicable laws you're held accountable to. In the end, the buck stops with you. You can't pass that risk along. You can insure against it, but that's a different question. So starting with due diligence of third-party selection processes, make sure you're asking the right questions. Make sure you're doing a deep dive, getting some transparency, if you will, into their security practices. Make sure you have contract language that defines and establishes requirements and responsibilities and enforcement and liability levels. And do that well before the contracts are signed. That's for your lawyers and for your security analysts to figure out and make sure you're covered. Ongoing monitoring is also essential, so I'll just end by saying that contracts should ensure the right to audit or to have someone else audit on your behalf so that you maintain that transparency over the time of the relationship. And you should also think about contingency plans, which is exiting, right? So service continuation if you have to shift to another vendor in the event that you are compelled to do so by some event or activity, or you want to terminate your services in the event of a change to your business strategy.
Jane?
I just wanted to say one of the things that we have in here is a chapter on supply chain, because it is so, there's so many things that you have to know. We talked about social engineering, we talked about insider threats, supply chain, just C-suite in general. So what we tried to do is take those topics and issues that you hear about, but you don't really have a lot of depth of knowledge, and put those together in one place for people to be able to get kind of one-stop shopping and what they need to do in those areas, because it is very complicated.
We were supposed to have a guy from Albany Med here, but he got the flu, unfortunately. So and there's a big problem apparently in the healthcare industry with security. What about at universities, Andrew? I mean, this is another sort of very public place where there's lots of third-party vendors, but there needs to be a lot of sort of retail cyber as well.
From Excelsior College's standpoint, the one great thing that I've learned is we're a center for academic excellence in cyber defense. So from the president's office all the way down to the lowest level of the IT staff or whoever it might be, the college is practicing cyber defense. That comes with cyber training, that comes with designation of roles and responsibility. It's, information capturing and security. From a university standpoint, it's an interesting scenario because there are so many agents within the college all doing their own thing. So every department is free to go talk to book reps and other third-party vendors to get software to incorporate into their classroom and things like that. But most of the time, those professors who are out there with your college's name, using it to say, I'm with so-and-so, I would like to use your product in my classroom, they really are not reporting back sometimes what they're actually doing because they're out there in freelance mode. As an educator, and I've done the same thing. I've looked at a vendor and said, oh, this is a really cool software, let me go explore it. I didn't provide any of our student data or student information, but I'm still out there saying, well, we could use it this way, that way. And who knows if that company has had security breaches. I didn't do the research into it. So that's my own fault. That's my own cyber ignorance, right? Because I have to be aware of that if I'm an agent of the college. So, and that's part of what Excelsior College is doing. From the top to the bottom, everyone is trying to practice cyber defense. So we're all working towards, a better institution.
So, Jane, there's this weird dichotomy going on that we really need more people who are experts in cybersecurity, but at the same time, there are too few of them, and there is definitely a major lack of people of color, of women. What's going on?
Well, right now, numbers show that we need approximately 1 million people currently, and by 2020, that may be 6 million. So how do we provide, I think that's what you're asking, how do we provide those numbers? We know that they're just a phenomenal amount of people. How can you reach those numbers even? But we know they're very underutilized. People of color around 10%, women around 10%, people of color around 8%, although you hear 8% for women today as well. 6% for the Hispanic population, probably Native Americans, probably 0.5%. So we know we have a huge amount of people out there that are probably willing and interested in moving into this, but how do we get that pipeline started? We really haven't been working with the government agencies and the schools until very recently to get it started down in the grade school and middle schools, and really that's where you're going to have to start. It's not going to turn over 1 million people, though, this year. It's impossible at this point to do that. The question is, how quickly can we start the pipeline working to get people in? The other piece, I think, is aptitude testing to see, basically, we want all these people, but do they have the fortitude, the ability to move into this?
What kind of skills do you need to have to
Well, you need
succeed?
to have some math skills, critical thinking skills, skills that if you're thinking about going into probably marketing, that may not be the same type of skill set that you're looking for. So if we're really thinking about that, we really need to see that we can provide those people. We can't just throw people in and say you will be successful at this. So I think those are the other things that aren't always being thought about as we create this new workforce. With Excelsior, we're looking at people who are changing jobs. We're looking at adults. So in that case, we're trying to get people in who are ready for a mid-career change and can go back themselves and then go into the field. So again, we're always trying to provide people, but it's a large number, and the government right now is lacking at least 30,000. So.
What we're going to do is take a few more questions, then come back to the panel. Did you have a question down there?
Yes. In the staffing world, we've found like a lot of the recs that we get for these IS security roles need a lot of experience. And not always find that with folks coming in out of school. I was listening to, I think it was on NPR, they were talking about there's younger folks can go to these giant, what do you call them? Almost like a conference where it's like ethical hackers, and big businesses and corporate world will look at these folks and consider them for. Is that something that is a trend lately? Is that do we have that up in this area?
Andrew or Jane? Is it a train? I'm sorry. Is it a
trend?
A trend, not a train. To go to
It
these
is.
socially ethical
It is a trend,
conferences.
yes. Yeah, and I think that's a good way to do it, but you probably need to get, quickly you can get training as opposed to the educational piece, which they aren't going to get yet, but you can get them basic skills through a lot of the training that's out there, and that's another area that we're working in to try to produce people more quickly.
I can just,
No, go ahead, Don.
I just want to add a little comment to that. It's very difficult to get someone that's that well-rounded in both application security or business analyst and then the technology side of this. And often we're faced with trying to bring someone from the ranks or looking for other resources within the IT or the rest of the department. So we've started an IT internship, a 2-year rotation where you go through all of the different areas within IT, and one of them is security. So we try to poach and coax people into joining our side, and you get a lot of people. To me, my most important criteria for someone is someone that knows how to break something, someone that enjoys trying to break something and then try to fix it and make it better, someone that really has a passion about really trying to make something better and learn a little bit about everything. So then it's hard to get someone that really enjoys that. A lot of people come out of and just want to be a programmer, and they want to go work at a startup somewhere. It's not very glamorous to come working at a grocery store. But we try to make it, we try to open that opportunity up to say, look, there's a lot of different things you can do that you may not be aware of. And we try to train and educate that to all of our prospects.
How many people have questions? Just raise your hand if you're going to have a question. I just want to gauge how much time we should leave. All right, you're right there.
I want to continue in the same vein. Some of the management where I work thinks that if you can spell IT, they can train you to be a security professional. I happen to think you have to have a particular mindset in order to become a good security professional. What's your thought on that? You sort of alluded to it in the beginning.
I would agree with you, but I think there may be a place. It may not be on the technical side, but you may find other areas that those people could work. So, but I do understand what you're saying, and I think there are areas that not everybody is suited for, and that's where I have the concern. You can't just say, yep, you can go do it. It takes abilities.
You can't really fit a square peg through a round hole, right? So when you look at it from that standpoint, you may have a certain type of skill for the job, but you lack in other areas. Can training, bolster that? That's our goal, right? To make that person, if they're willing and they're able, to give them the education, the training, so that they become well-rounded and they fit through the hole. But not everyone is cut out for it.
I assume you can fake it till you make it in a lot of areas, but not this one.
Well, you can try and fake it.
It's
costly.
very apparent very quick if
And you would
It's
very
very
obviously
clear.
fail.
So to bring it back to the gentleman's question at the end, I just want to say that there are people that have a propensity for understanding how hackers would think, how attackers might socially engineer an individual or get into a system. But to Don's point, I think it's more important that you seek to train and educate the person in the context that they work. So your lawyers should be aware of the context of contractual language related to security and the liabilities aspects. Your systems network people should be aware of how to build your networks in a secure fashion. Your application developers should be trained in the art of building security in by design and testing code to make sure it's not going to explode. Your business people on the everyday professional level should be aware of handling data, the types of liabilities and legalities and mandates and things of that nature that the organization is held to. And then last but not least, you most certainly at the executive level need to speak about risk. Don't be afraid to train them in the art of cyber risk and incorporating that into the overall enterprise risk management strategies and planning. I think too many organizations don't layer that over everything that they do and build it into their DNA, and that's the secret sauce.
I was just going to say one other thing. You asked me about women and people of color. Because those numbers are so low, one of the issues you have is it a welcoming environment for them to go in? So if the cultures within the organizations don't change to become more welcoming to different people, you end up having people come in and slot right out again because they're not comfortable being there. So that's a big piece that senior leaders can look at and try to work on that within the organization if they really intend to bring in numbers from different groups. Thank you.
Right here and then over there. Yeah.
So the threat is even greater than you're talking about here. You're talking about having 1 million people short right now, 6 million later. The issue is you have countries that sponsor
Absolutely.
the ability to learn at a rapid rate far beyond our ability to train to keep up with that rate.
The question is about countries that sponsor cyber terrorism.
Well, it's not even just I'll put this point up and they can elaborate on it. The fact that China, Russia, and all the other countries that do this, China trains their people from a young age to do this. I've been in the IT field for 46 years, so I've seen everything come and go. Our ability to train a workforce at that level and the type of people that you're talking about needing are far and few between.
Yeah.
Okay, the ethical hackers are a nice beginning and everything else. How are we going to really combat these things? Because it's not just a threat from outside, it's a threat from inside too. They have access, those lists they take, that they steal, the government lists and everything else, those names that they use, they go after those people. They bribe those people. Once they're internal, you can train the people all you want, but they have access to your information. A good point is people want to encrypt the data at rest. It does no good if the people within the organization all have access to that data at rest.
So Jane, okay, go ahead, Andrew.
I'd like to start this one. You hit on a great point, and I'm not going to go into all the countries out there, but there are, let's just choose China, okay? The top 3% of students in China are all genius level students, and that is more students than we have in the United States. Okay, so the question is, how do we compete with that, right? Because not saying that China's doing anything wrong, but those individuals can be bribed. Those individuals can grow up and work for companies. Ethical hacking itself is supposed to be the countermeasure for the company to figure out how to defend itself against the outside hacker. Now, going back to the question over there, I went to DEF CON 2 years ago, and the Department of Defense was sitting there recruiting. They were giving aptitude tests if you wanted to take time to take an exam, and they would offer you a job. Because if you had such a high level of hacking ability, then they wanted you to work for them. How do you handle that?
But the other issue is much technology is put in place and harden our systems and do all the things we do. Within a day or two, they're compromised. They can be compromised because there's changes in the infrastructure.
So you need a recovery plan.
You do. And you need a there's a lot that has to be done.
And you need training.
Constant adaptation.
Watching over not only the technology and the people. It's tough, and we see this with Apple now and the FBI. Looking at how do we deal with that problem, all those type of things come to bear.
Jane, you wanted to comment?
Well, I think, going there, the issue of security versus privacy really becomes one of the key issues out there today that the country and senior level people have to think about those.
Russia and China don't care.
No, they don't.
They don't care.
But from Ours,
ethical and we have this thought pattern, but unfortunately,
It's like the East Germans training the
in the
Olympians.
shopper world, they'll get killed by, on the financial side.
Sure.
In the real world, you get killed by bullets. So,
Yeah.
it's another way around.
I mean, just to touch a little bit on what you were saying, we could never catch up, right? So you have to admit that you could never catch up, especially for an organization such as ourselves. You know, it's our job to keep our stores up and running and check customers out very fast. You know, so I'm not even talking about chip and pin yet, how much that slows everything down if you've all experienced it. But there's a point in time where our IT is not going to be able to handle all of these things, so we have to partner with the appropriate good third-party resources that are trained and dedicated into doing pen tests, into helping us catch things that we're not aware of. So we do that, and we partner with several good external firms that actually help bolster this instead of waiting for an audit to come along. So we're actually trying to be proactive, and instead of doing, you know, a pen test once a year, it's continuous. We're doing continuous exercises to be able to be more proactive and try to catch any vulnerabilities or weaknesses in our systems ahead of the hackers. You know, there's going to be a point in time where we're not going to catch it, but that's where we fall into our incident response mode and be more prepared. So the answer is you're never going to be ahead of this game, and you just need to be more prepared.
Not unless the government gets behind it.
Yes.
That's the issue right now.
Yep.
There is no government oversight to cybersecurity across the board. And I mean, you're doing a great job and everything else,
Right.
but look at our power grids,
Yep.
your power plants. Some of this technology there is very, very not up to date.
We're going to move over here to this woman.
Yes, hi. My name's Desiree, and I'm with Alliance Worldwide Investigative Group, and I just wanted to touch on what Jane had already said, and Deborah, and that is recognizing if it is a three-part problem, people, process, and technology. Believe it or not, I'm not going to be self-serving and sell the fact that I sell background checks. I'm going to swing over to as is. And that is an international security organization that takes individuals, enlightens them through training, creates networking opportunities so different people in security from high level to grassroots have an opportunity. Therefore, the communication is more up and down. And my real point is, they have a women in security. And until we get women from the top level down, integrated in the decision-making process and the problem-solving process, we're missing 50% of the population. When that is bridged, we'll start uniting that brain force, if you will, to fight cybersecurity. And the only way that's going to happen, currently there's only 2% of women in security on the top level positions. And that's what as is about, international bridging.
It's called As Is.
As is, ASIS. You can
I
do
spelled it differently in my mind, but
Yes, I know, right?
who
Thank you.
who has a question over here? Anybody? Right here.
And we started off talking with the credit cards and the chips, yet Europe has been using them since the 80s, mid-80s.
Yeah.
What took American banking so long to make that, given all the hacks?
What took American banking so long to catch up with Europe?
It's money, right? If we look at it and boil everything down, it's one of the reasons why the government hasn't backed cybersecurity, right? There's money to be had, there's money to be made, and there's money to, you know, propose things, right? When you look at large organizations, if they have a cyber incident, then they're responsible for the recovery of it. If we have all these wonderful cards with chips in it, I mean, what's the difference between that or I've seen people pay their bill with their fingerprint, right? There's stores and stuff that take fingerprint scans down south, you know, throughout the Carolinas. Why isn't everyone using that? Well, people are afraid, right? There's always that fear factor of if I give you a new technology, are you willing to use it? And what risk are you willing to take with that technology, right? If someone gets your card with your chip on it, maybe Don can speak to this, you know, from a business standpoint, what information is actually on that chip, right? And what's the risk of you losing that card now? There's some people I know who say, I am credit card free. I will not use a credit card. I won't use a debit card. My grandparents were that way, right? That's not the world we live in anymore, right? Technology evolves. People need to evolve, and not only for, the sake of the world, but for the, I'll say, for the education factor, right? We have to be cyber aware. It goes all the way back to the awareness that we talked about earlier. Right? I can give you all the technology in the world, but if you don't know how to use it, it's a box.
Don, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to try to circle back to say, your original question was, what took it so long? Why didn't chip and pin come to the United States so far? And it's the banking industry. And that's what, the fraud rose to a certain level that they wanted to do the liability shift back to the merchant or back to the retailer. It doesn't really do anything for us from a security perspective. It helps prevent someone from counterfeiting your credit card. It helps with some other encryption technology that's built into the new equipment that people deploy, the new card readers. So it does help in that regard, but it slows up the checkout. There's a lot of consumer education and training that has to go along with it, and it's been a very rough road for not just for all chip and pin deployments and all retailers. It was the liability shift from MasterCard and Visa was supposed to occur in October, and if you didn't have a chip and pin compliant reader, if someone had their card hacked or fraud was detected, you could be liable. Well, you have to take a look at that. How much is that liability going to cost you versus the cost of replacing all of your systems? If you're a small retailer, you might not do that. In our environment, we had to do it, right? You have to do that, but it's still it's not the end all. It doesn't mean there's never going to be any more credit card hacks. It's just the banking industry pushed for that liability shift, and I don't know why it took that long to get here, because, like I said, it's been in Europe for over 10 years. I think it's really been really the banking industry trying to shift that liability. Hope that answers.
Does anybody have a question before we come back to this gentleman who had a question? Right here.
You talked about incident response. You haven't really mentioned the spot in between, which is the detection, the logging, etc. Most studies have shown that companies are told about their hacks from somebody outside the organization. So how important does it really play right now in trying to do audit logging and detection of events within your organization?
How can we better detect hacking?
I can tell you a little bit about our experience that in the beginning, a couple of years ago, it was all of this source of information, all of these logs and events coming through, and it's just too much for people to handle. We've had to evolve that into looking for key indicators, not trying to weed through all this data. It is big data, so you have to kind of take a big data approach to all these sources of information that you have, and really look for risk indicators. So we've taken the shift away to look at infrastructure and applications, but we're really looking at risk, and also taking a forensic approach where I have this data, I need to be able to hold on to it, because when I do see a breach, I need to be able to go back very quickly to understand the impact and the extent of the damage without needing to bring in a forensic investigator or pull and disrupt our business. So we've shifted from being more, I'm going to hopefully see something, to being more forensically driven and being more evidence produced and indicators of high-level risk. And I think you'll see a lot of the tools in the industry shift towards that, more risk-based.
So I think to add to that, taking that risk-based mindset and building on that, implementing monitoring strategies that start with the basic fundamentals of having an inventory, knowing which assets among that inventory are your most sensitive, your most critical, highlighting and focusing your resources on making sure you are taking care of business and have your finger on the pulse of those assets. Really ramping up your monitoring, ramping up your logging, making sure that you are robustly logging and adequately logging, preserving your logs for the amount of time you need, and having them readily available, not have to go through, you know, somersaults 3 days in a row to get your hands on log data to support that all-important analysis and figure out what the scope of the incident is and be able to bring practical focus on response.
Person in the back over here.
Can I just jump in on that before
Yeah.
we leave that? One of the things I also think, and I don't know how many people here are from small businesses, but I think we're talking kind of large organizations up here. One of the issues that we struggle facing, I think, is small businesses are really a gateway into other businesses and as a way to move up. And small businesses don't bring with them a large IT department. In some cases, it's the owner. So in many ways, we aren't focusing or taking the focus and bringing it to them in order to avert some of the things that we would be able to if they had the knowledge. So we're trying to work with small businesses to bring that knowledge to them because they are in a place where they can become, they pass it on to someone else. They allow that to get in there.
So in the back and then over here.
I just wanted to point out that when detection works, that's generally when you're not going to hear about the breach. It's when the detection fails and something has been sitting there for months and months collecting data. Those are when you get the things like Anthem had their network breach for 15 months and they didn't know about it for that whole period of time. Unless it's just a employee insider who dumps the entire database and walks out with it, very often it takes a lot of time to gather that data for an outsider.
Yeah, and the focus that we've tried to address is looking at the indicators of such a data exfiltration as an indicator of a breach versus someone failed passwords or something like that. So we've tried to look at, you know, what data is leaving the company, who has access to that data, and really focus on trying to find an anomaly in that regard.
I think the average is over 200 days now that they're in there before somebody knows it. So.
Over here.
I wonder if you could speak to the process of companies having their information hacked and essentially compensating the hackers to regain their private records. And the example I'm thinking of that was in the media a couple of weeks ago was the LA area hospital that essentially compensated the hackers to get access to their cyber records.
Ransom hacking.
Ransomware.
So the difference between a company that gets an A in security and a company that gets a B in security, they say, is that you know, right? So first of all, to speak to your point, that you're able to detect. And second of all, that you're prepared to be responsive to that. And the key to that particular situation or avoiding damages in that particular situation is really, really, really good backup protocol, right? Making sure that all of your information is backed up in a way that is protected from any encryption or cryptoware. In the event of that type of an incident, you quarantine it and restore from the last good backup. So that's the protocol. Agencies that don't or organizations that don't, including, you know, any size agency, small, medium, or large, are running at risk because you don't want to pay those types of ransoms. Often they come back. It's not a one-time thing, or they don't give you the keys anyways.
Does anybody else have any questions before we start to wrap?
I just recently, actually today, I just read that the phone that they found, the terrorist owned at the San Bernardino killings, was actually a county-owned phone, and it had management software available on it, but I don't know whether it wasn't deployed correctly or whatever. So you can have the appliances, the software, and all kinds of, you know, apparatus on your system, but if it's not being used appropriately or correctly, it's not going to make the difference it's supposed to make. And this whole thing with Apple would have been, to me, a moot point if they had just followed through and did what they were supposed to do.
Anybody want to comment?
I don't think that's unlike any other IT system. You know, you know, you have them. Somebody says it's a great idea. I need to get it, and did you really, truly, fully utilize it, or is it sitting in the corner somewhere? Are you getting your return of investment over it? I think the same can be said with, you know, the security tools and platforms that we put in place. If you're not using it and taking advantage of it, you're going to put yourself at risk. But if you also have some oversight, you know, someone should have as part of their responsibility to make sure these systems are being utilized and make sure that they're providing the value that they're supposed to to your organization or your business.
It also goes along with the training, right? Because I'll use passwords, for example. A lot of companies say every 6 months or every 3 months you have to change your password, right? I could probably guess in this room that the majority of you add a number to the end of your password and increment it, right? Or something to that effect. It's some sequence that you just increment by one. Does that adhere to the policy? Sure. But if someone has your password already and they put that in as a starting point, the password cracking software becomes more likely to get your new password. And I've also seen it where companies say, well, you can't use any of the 3 previous passwords you use. So I've watched someone change their password 4 times and then set it back to the original. Right? Training is training.
We have 3 minutes, and I wanted to make sure that we asked each of our experts here the number one thing you would like this audience to take away from our conversation. We'll start with Jane.
I guess what I would, from my standpoint, focusing on the workforce and how you can change your culture to make it a more welcoming workforce to get the numbers in and keep the numbers in your workforce that you're going to need today and in the future would be a primary thing to think about.
Don?
I would say make do with what you have and try to assess your current culture, your environment, your IT systems, your people, and try to incorporate security culture or security process or responsibility into their existing jobs.
I would say assure resiliency and preparedness in the event of an incident. There's no such thing as perfect security. Things are going to happen. Be prepared to be responsive. Think about the plans and capabilities that you need to have in place to address your business impact. You're all business leaders, business administrators. Think about it in context of the impact on your day-to-day, the impact on your people, your ability to do business. And then don't just think about risk in the current context. Think about long-term risk and the objectives of protecting your information and your assets, including downstream liabilities for third parties. So really have a plan.
Andrew?
I'm going to go back to this wonderful little card that everyone got, and it says the term cyber ignorance. At some point in time, we're all ignorant, right? Ask questions. This is a great place to network. This is a great place to get answers and to help each other, right? We're talking about global awareness, cyber awareness, and it's only going to get better if we all get better. So,
I think we've had a great panel here. Andrew Hurd is with Excelsior College. Deb Snyder, Deputy Information Security Officer with New York State. Don Weekly is from Price Chopper. And Dr. Jane LeClaire is with Excelsior in Washington. Thank you.